This morning I'm here to clean this bed up and plant potatoes in it. Now it's the middle of winter here in Tasmania, and the only place you can grow potatoes this time of the year, or plant potatoes, is in a greenhouse. Now while I'm planting potatoes today, what I wanted to talk about was not so much the potatoes themselves, but our strivings to be independent of supermarkets. Over the last 100 years or so, people have been taught to be very dependent on the supermarket. The supermarket has been the place that people go for food. We go to work, we earn money, and we exchange that money for food. Now, this of course is something that is a modern idea. In the past, it's not the way it worked. In the past, people used their labour, their actual effort, as I am this morning, to create their own food supply. And that gives you an independence that you don't have when you are supermarket dependent. So in this world that we live in today, where we've been through lockdowns and lockouts, and we're looking at high inflation, we're looking at food shortages, it's really easy to see why we need to be supermarket independent. And what I wanted to talk about while I'm doing this is the efforts that we make and the steps that we take to actually gain some degree of independence from the supermarket. Now, I don't want to claim that we are in any way 100% independent of supermarkets. No, we do still shop there, because some things in today's supply chain that you do need to buy are really hard to find outside of the supermarket. But I'll talk about more of that later. So the first step is the obvious one, and that's to produce food. Now, for us, we are vegetarian, so that primarily means growing vegetables and fruit. We also have some hens that produce a few eggs, which we eat as well. We would, and we do eat dairy products, but we don't have the capability to produce those because we mostly have forest and only have limited cleared space. Producing food of any kind, of course, demands some soil, and if you haven't got the soil, it is a lot more difficult. So your first priority must be to try and get some land to grow on. Now, if you're in a town or a city where you have very limited space, look around you and see who has space that they're not using that would be willing to allow you to utilize that in exchange possibly for some vegetables or something along these lines. Can you do some deals that actually allow you to get some land without spending money? If you can, go for it. But if you're in a situation where you're able to get out and to buy some land where you can grow things, then by all means do that as a priority. But don't be completely put off the fact of producing food because you have that limited space. Use everything that you can. If you are looking for inspiration, go back to the old Good Life comedy series and see how you can just use every inch that you've got, everything that's available to you to actually produce food. So, of course, across summer is where we produce the bulk of our food. In veggies and our fruit crops, things like apples are very valuable to us and give us a lot of food that we then eat across winter. Things like potatoes that are staple crops. I try and produce potatoes all year round, and so that's why today I'm working on this bed, which is planted in winter and will be harvested towards the early summer. And I've already planted another bed about a month ago, which will come about a month earlier, so they will stage through, and then in a couple of months I'll start planting outside again. This way we get a continuous supply of potatoes across the season. That of course is just one food, but it's an example of what you need to do. You need to make food production a priority rather than earning money, because you're trying to use your labour to produce your food rather than labour to produce money to purchase food. And what that gains you is independence. Now, I'm not going to go into the process of growing fruit or vegetables in this video. If you're wanting to learn more about that, particularly in a Tasmanian climate, I've got lots of other videos that you can go and have a look at. And if you're in a different climate, go find somebody who is local to you and that you can learn from them how to grow in your area. The second process that we undertake in order to be independent of the supermarket is to actually store and preserve the food that we grow. Now, with something like potatoes, which I'm going to plant here, that's really easy in our climate because mostly they store really well in the ground. If we dig them and keep them somewhere cool inside, they will keep for a few months as well. So a really easy crop to preserve. Something like pumpkins, of course, you simply put somewhere dry and they will keep quite well as well for months and months. Dried beans is another crop that we grow that stores really easy. Doesn't take much effort, just keeping it dry. But there are other things like apples, plums that take more effort, where we bottle them, or some places you might call that canning. Also, we use the dehydrator this year. We've used that, and that's been another method of preserving. We make jams, we make pickles. Basically, it depends on what the product is, but we look at excess as an opportunity to actually store for a later time of the year where you haven't got that crop. So learning the art of preserving food is an absolute key to self-reliance, and something that I have talked about previously, and I have other videos about it if you're interested. What you're actually doing in that process is you're replacing a lot of the products that you would go to the supermarket and buy. The jams, the pickles. Look, some people have got into a very bad habit of shopping very frequently from the supermarket. They will go every day or 2 or 3 times a week at least and buy what they think of as fresh food. Of course, real fresh food is what you actually get out of the ground, out of your garden directly, and prepare it within hours. Now, the reality of life is that you simply cannot, in most environments, produce all the food that you need or all the items that you need. And there's going to be some things that you cannot grow in your climate that you still want to eat. Now, for us, that is things like grains that we don't yet have the capacity to produce grains. Also seeds, that's the other thing, oil seeds. We have difficulties in producing the oil seeds that we consume. So things like linseed, sunflower, also almonds. We haven't got almonds in production at this stage, and may never, because the climate is not ideal here. So what this means is you either go without or you actually do go and buy those products. Now, we still go and buy those products because we can. If it was a survival situation, we'd probably just have to go without. But because we can, we go and buy them. Now, the way to even out some of the imbalances in the supply chain, some of the problems of inflation or short supply, is to buy bulk. That means that we buy wheat and we store it. Rather than going and buying bread, which is a short-term product that doesn't keep very well, or buying flour, which keeps longer than bread but still not that well, only really a few weeks, buying wheat means that you can store it for years, and it means that you're going to be able to keep a quantity of it and have it there. But what you need to do is to set yourself up so that you can actually turn that wheat into flour and into bread, the end product that you're going to eat. And that's what we have done. We grind our own flour, we make our own bread. We buy other things like seeds in bulk and we store them. One of the ways of extending storage life is to use vacuum storage, and we do this with some things, particularly things like, say, linseed, which which is prone to weevils. And by vacuum storing it, it means that we get longer storage life. So we also look for suppliers outside of the supermarket for this type of thing. There are places where you can go and buy organic produce in bulk, and doing that is a really great way of doing it. Of course, if you can buy from a farmer locally, it's even better. But look outside of the supermarket supply chain. Buy bulk and store for all those things that you can't actually produce yourself. The mention of bread, of course, brings us to the fourth and the final step that we take to reduce our supermarket dependence. And that is to make a lot of products that people buy ourselves. Now, a lot of those I've mentioned in preservation, the things like jams and pickles and things like that, but also bread, yogurt, and soap, and things like this that we have learnt to be dependent on a supermarket for, that somebody else does the work in processing that food and making it in the form that you want to eat. It's easy to just go and buy it, already done for you, saves you the time. But the question is, what do you do with the time? The time you've saved, you go and spend it working to get the money to buy it. So realistically, it's, I think, a more interesting process to actually spend your time making that food. Now, I don't have any qualms about using modern advantages like bread machines to actually speed up the process so that we can have a loaf in there happening. It only takes you 5 to 10 minutes to prepare, but it'll be happening while you're planting potatoes or doing something else. But you've actually produced something for yourself instead of buying it, and that makes you more independent. So there's the 4 steps that we have actually introduced in our lives to reduce our dependence on supermarkets. As I've said, we still do buy things, but we try and do it to our advantage, and we manage it in a way that we can save money as much as we can and have some buffer so that we're actually ironing out a lot of those inconsistencies in supply. Hopefully that has been of some assistance to you. Now that I've got these potatoes in, I've got one job more to do, and that's to get some water onto them. And in a couple of weeks they'll start coming through, and then I'll be doing some hilling, as I have done already on the previous bed, to keep them going. So that's all from me for today. That little job is now done. I'll be back with some other films soon. There's lots of jobs to do outside. There's pruning, the fruit trees need to be fertilised as we get ready for the next spring. Thanks for watching.